In this session, I'm going to talk about what are the things that we really need to be aware of before we start building excellent visualizations using Tableau. See, when we are first connected to some kind of a data source, in the earlier session, we have connected to that copy data source. Now, Tableau will display the data connection. We have seen that the Tableau has displayed the data connection and the fields in the data window in that sidebar. And just let me open that for you. So when we have connected to our data source, the data and all the fields are displayed on the various parts of the sidebar. And as we said, these can be dragged into any of these locations. And depending on how and when they are dragged, different kinds of visualizations are going to come out for us. Right? The placement of each of these fields is purely based on the type, the data type associated with that. So what we can do is we'll just try doing something. First of all, before we quickly create one quick visualization, I want to really differentiate between the dimensions and the measures, which Tableau has used its own intelligence and classified the fields as measures and dimension. If you look at all these, okay, area code, date, market size, they are actually the fields out here, right? Profit, margin, sales, COGS, they are all here. Profit, sales, margin, COGS. Whereas a few elements like date, market, state, area code, they are all here. Market, area code, date, they are all here. So the overall fields, they are classified into measures and dimension. Just as a simple way to understand, measures are something that I can really aggregate, right? It has identified, Tableau has identified those fields which can be aggregated. It has classified them as measures. Means I could be able to do a summation of them. I can do the average of them. I can do the counting for them, or probably I can even get into the maximum and the minimum values for them. They all get classified as measures. Whereas something that determines the level of detail at which I can aggregate the measure, that is what is a dimension. So I can slice the measure, I can group the measure, or I can classify the measure based on the dimension. Right? I can group it where the measure really fits. So based on the level of dimension that we are getting, that we are creating, that is what we talk about the level of detail of that particular view or of that particular visualization. So based on the dimension, I can very well talk about the level of detail of that particular visualization. As a simple example, let's look at it. Let's say I want to pull this market. Let me simply drag this market into the columns. I am not doing anything, simply drag the market into the column. Oh, here I could see central, east, south, west. So there is some kind of all the unique values of that column called market. If you go back to your data, under this head called market. Okay, here you are seeing central, somewhere it should be east, south, etc. So those are the ones that are displayed out here. Similarly, when I drag, let's say the sales, okay, from here I drag the sales into the rows. Suddenly a graph got created, right? We don't need to do anything out here. And if you see here, it has taken the sales and it has summed them based on the market. Right now it has summed them based on the market. So there is a lot of intelligence that it is using in terms of performing the operation. Now let's try understanding what has happened here. The sales is actually a measure, right? Here it's a measure. Now it can be aggregated. So by default it has aggregated it as a sum, right? We can change it, fair enough, but by default Tableau has aggregated it as a sum. So when you are using a field as a measure, so there are different types of aggregations. I can do summation, minimum, maximum, etc. So that aggregation is also shown out here. What is the kind of aggregation that is performed on it, right? And I could, right now it is showing sum, it can even change to anything else. But when we look at the market, it has come from dimension. And there are only 4 values in that particular column called market. So one of those 4 values will be there for each record of data, central, east, south, west. So it is slicing the measure here, right? The whole, instead of doing the total sales, it has computed the sales separately for each of the market. So it did not do the total. So it is doing the summation for each market separately. Now comes some of the flexibilities with respect to Tableau. If I really want to recategorize the stuff, right now I have found something is shown as a part of the dimension, but I want to change it as a measure or vice versa. I can very well simply do it. The default aggregation, okay, one thing, I can reorganize the fields. Even the default aggregation that it has done, the summation, I can change it to anything else. Now let's look at it. Let's say I want to recategorize. So let's say the market size. The market size, okay, what is the data here? The market size, oh, it's a small market, major market, so it's definitely a number. It's definitely a dimension. But somewhere else, it might very well be possible that a few fields it might have categorized. Let me just see type. Okay, let's say the area code is still a number out here, right? The area code is showing a number out here, but let's say here it is showing it as a dimension. But if I assume that it has to be a measure, though it's not, but just for the sake of understanding, let's say if I want it to be a measure, all I do is drag it from here to here. I get my area code out here. So it's that simple a process. I can recategorize a field which is present as a dimension. I can change it to a measure, or from the measure to a dimension simply by dragging the field. Similarly, even here, let's say the sales, right? Whatever is out here, I can change that here also as a dimension or a measure. Let's say this one, right click, it is showing, I can, right now it's a dimension. But if I want to change it as a measure, I can still change it, and for that measure I can take the minimum, maximum or the count. Right, I can take the minimum, maximum or the count associated by converting it into a measure. Similarly, this one also, if you see right now, it is a measure which is showing sum. If required, I can quickly change it to average. Okay, I have changed it to the average. Or I can make it even into a dimension. So Tableau gives me that kind of a flexibility in terms of converting from measure to dimension or dimension to measure just with a simple right click and dragging of the stuff. Even the default aggregation I can change, as we have already seen. Right now we have changed it to average instead of sum, and now we get a completely different picture altogether. The average sales in south is much smaller compared to the other three zones. In the other three zones, the average sales is more or less the same, whereas in the south the numbers are much lesser, right? And you could very well change that stuff out here. You could go even to a minimum, maximum, standard deviation. Okay, let's look at the standard deviation. Okay, here the volatility is much lesser in the south, so there's a lot of consistency in the south market, whereas the east market is much more volatile. So some such kind of quick change in the aggregations can very well be brought up. Now, the other important point that we really need to understand here is whatever the fields that we are using, are they discrete or continuous? Again, Tableau identifies it using its own intelligence. So there is a visual distinction that Tableau is giving based on how it has identified the field. Right? One, the color of the icon. Now if you look at here, the dimensions or the discrete stuff are highlighted with a blue color. If you see this here, these are all dimensions, and these are in general they are discrete. What is discrete? Discrete fields are something which are more and more distinct and separate from each other. So I can even reorder them and still make sense. So there will not be any kind of arithmetic relationship or anything that is existing with the distinct or discrete fields. And Tableau identifies them with a blue color. So whenever we are pulling any kind of a discrete item into the row or a column, it shows with a blue color, and immediately it makes it the header. Any discrete field that comes out, Tableau makes them as the headings for that rows and the columns. Whereas when we are talking about the continuous, the values in that are more and more flowing kind, continuous kind. They are not independent and separate from each other. By default, you will see that the numeric kind of fields, and in some cases the date kind of fields, they can be shown more and more continuous. Whereas here the text kind of fields, to a large extent they are shown as discrete itself. And when they are continuous, the order makes a lot of difference. Right? They have a logical relation, they have an arithmetic relation, so the order plays a very important role. Right? So when you are pulling them onto the Tableau row or column, what you could clearly see is they are shown in green, and immediately it considers that as an axis. Here it considers that as a heading, here it considers it as an axis. And the same logic when you are going with color, any discrete field you are putting as a part of the color. This is the color. Any discrete field you are dragging onto the color like this. What you find is corresponding to each you have a different color. For example, the same market if I drag onto the color. For each market there would be a differentiation with respect to the color. Whereas if I drag, okay, the market I'll take it back. But if I drag the same sales onto the color, I see it's a grid. It's a gradient. Okay, 103 is the lowest sale, 272 is the highest sale. So the color from lighter to darker, the gradient is what is shown as a part of the default. So depending on whether it's a continuous or discrete, we see the way Tableau handles them is different, right? How it is being used. So if you look at it in the shelf, the color of the active field, the discrete fields are generally represented in blue and the continuous ones are represented by Tableau in green. So many of the dimensions by default, they are discrete, and many of the measures, they are by default continuous. But you can very well change it. Now the way you pull it here you can use it as a discrete or continuous. Any field, you have an option to change from discrete to continuous or vice versa. So any field, even if it is here, if it is a dimension or a measure, if I want to use it as a discrete field, I can very well use it. Now here if you see the sales, right now if you look at the properties of it, so right now we know it is continuous. There is an option that you can convert it into a discrete, or from the measure you can make it into a dimension. It's as good as you are dragging it from here to here. So right now it's a number. If you want, you can change the type of it, right? So all these are some of the things that we can by directly by default go ahead with. So here also if you see, this is a dimension, but you have an option to convert it into a measure. But of course here it is not giving me convert to continuous because the product is not a number. So I can't convert it into a continuous in any case. But probably if I look at the area code, it is giving me an option. By default it has classified it as a discrete, but it is giving me an option where I can make it continuous. So some kind of flexibility is being provided to us to change the data type, to change the measure to continuous or discrete based on our requirement and usage. It's not that it's a rigid stuff, but yes, to a large extent, Tableau uses its own intelligence to initially classify the data into a dimension or a measure and into a discrete or a continuous kind of stuff. So if I really want to change the default of any field or any view, any item that is present in the view, I can simply right click on it. I can convert it either to discrete or continuous depending on what is its existing scenario. Right? Now, what is very much important before we actually do the visualization is, one, you have to pay a lot of attention to all these fields, right? So whichever are the fields you are going ahead to create visualization, you really need to understand whether they are dimensions or measures, whether they are discrete or continuous. If possible, do some kind of experimentation in terms of changing it from discrete to continuous and vice versa, and that is where you gain a lot of understanding because Tableau takes care of the differentiation in the way it is presenting this particular data. It is summarizing and making you visualize the data in a different way depending on which category the data is falling into. So a quick experimentation can give you an enough understanding about the visualization process. All right. Thanks a lot for listening to this session. Thank you very much.